Hello, my name is Arthur and I am all geared for adventure. Welcome to the channel, and in this video I wanted to show you how, by introducing a few relatively simple changes, you can largely improve the capabilities of your 9-speed Shimano Sora drivetrain in your budget gravel bike without spending a ton of money on a full GRX group set. Even though around 4 years have passed since the release of the Shimano GRX gravel group set, many entry-level gravel bikes still come with the 9-speed Shimano Sora drivetrain. Personally, I don't have anything against the 9-speed drivetrains. In fact, I think that if you don't want to be a competitive racer, having 9 cogs in the rear and 2 front chainrings gives a sufficient gear range for any cycling enthusiast, and in addition 9-speed components are relatively affordable and drivetrains are therefore cheap to maintain. Sora is also a decent road group set. Modern STI levers are ergonomic, they don't have exposed cables, and the derailleur works pretty well on paved roads. Unfortunately, what works well on road bikes is not necessarily going to work that well on gravel. Sora rear derailleur has a very soft spring that causes a chain to rattle whenever you hit a bump, and the precision diminishes a lot in dirt or mud. Furthermore, especially if, like you live in a hilly area, you might find the compact road crankset with 50 and 34 teeth chainrings a little bit too much for many gravel ascents, where gradients might be a little bit steeper than on paved roads. So, what can you do if you just cannot stretch your budget enough to put your hands on a new GRX group set? In the not so distant past, when 9-speed components were the pinnacle of cycling technology, you were allowed to freely mix and match components from MTB and road group sets. And although this functionality has been lost with the introduction of 10 and then 11-speed components, our good old STI Sora shifter will still work perfectly fine with a 9-speed rear mountain bike derailleur. Therefore, I highly recommend replacing Sora with an old second-hand 9-speed XT derailleur, which provides stronger chain tension and offers better performance off-road. Of course, this is still a derailleur that doesn't have a clutch, so it will still rattle a bit, but it just works better. Now let's talk about cranksets. Unfortunately, when it comes to 9-speed components, there aren't really many options out there for a dedicated gravel-specific gear ratio of 46:30. Especially if you want to use a modern crankset with an integrated axle. However, not everyone is aware that you can freely use in your 9-speed drivetrain, you can use a dedicated 10 or 11-speed cranksets, and it's not a problem, because while the chain width differs between 9, 10 and 11 speed chains, the width differs, but only on the outside. On the inside, chains have exactly the same spacing, so the 9-speed chain will work perfectly fine with a 10-speed chainring or 11-speed chainring, and this external difference of the width doesn't really matter, because unlike on the cassette where the cogs are pretty tightly spaced, on the chainring the space between two chainrings is quite large, so it doesn't really matter if you have a wider 9-speed chain, it will still work with a 10-speed crankset. We can actually go a little bit farther with this, because it seems that you don't actually need to use a dedicated 9-speed chain on a 9-speed cassette. I know it sounds weird, but I actually tried this on this bike, and it seems that the width difference between a 9-speed chain and 10-speed chain isn't that far off, and you can successfully use a 10-speed chain on a 9-speed cassette. It not only works, but actually from my experience it works better than 9-speed chain. And maybe because it's a little bit narrower, so it's also a little bit more flexible. And obviously 10-speed chains are from a higher end group, so they are made of better quality components, so they should also last longer. And you definitely don't have to be worried about how it will work with a 10-speed crankset. So there are benefits to using a 10-speed chain on your 9-speed cassette. Going back for a moment to the crankset, if you look at the Shimano specification, you will notice that GRX crankset, compared to standard rope cranks, have a chain line moved a little bit farther to the outside, and therefore they require a dedicated GRX front derailleur, and the standard road front derailleur wouldn't work with them. However, this doesn't seem to be necessarily true. If you look at this bike, I actually have a GRX derailleur, but the reason why I had to change it was different. So before I moved to GRX, I used the regular road crankset with a regular chain line of a road crankset, and I also used a regular road front derailleur, which was a Tiagra derailleur. And after moving to GRX, I actually discovered that the Tiagra was perfectly able to, the cage of the Tiagra derailleur was perfectly able to reach far enough so the chain would be able to get into the light chainring. However, Tiagra has a very long arm. So as the cage moved to the outside a little bit more, the arm of the front derailleur started to rub against the tire. Right now I have 650B wheels with 650B tires, so there is actually a lot more space between the tire and the seat post. But before I had a 28-inch wheels with 40mm tires. And because of that, because the chainstays are fairly short in this bike, I had this problem with the derailleur arm rubbing against the tire. So if you have a longer chainstay, or if you use 650B wheels, or if you have a different front derailleur, so I think Sora has a shorter arm than Tiagra, there is a chance that you will not have this problem, and maybe you won't have to replace the derailleur. Definitely it's worth trying and buying the new front derailleur only if you notice that there is a problem. And here is an icing on the cake, the brakes, because you probably assume that using 9-speed Sora shifters you are limited to using only mechanical disc brakes that don't have a really strong reputation. However, while it is true that hydraulic 9-speed shifters don't really exist, there is a solution that kind of works around this problem. So what you can see on this bike is a set of Juntech R1 brakes, which are a cable actuated hydraulics. So the caliper actually has a hydraulic fluid inside, and the braking action is activated by pulling the cable. So in other words, they are designed to work with just your standard mechanical levers. So how does it work? Well, I'm using those brakes for just a couple of months at this point, but they work pretty damn excellent. Actually, they beat the crap out of Avid BB7s or TRP Spires, both of which I have used in the past, and I still have Spires in my other bike, Bone Track Beyond. However, these brakes have a stronger biting force than BB7s, and they offer a better modulation than TRP Spires, while at the same time they stay at a very competitive level in terms of pricing. I actually paid for the set of these a little bit less than for a set of 8-bit BB7s together with rotors, and you also get rotors buying one of these. And if you haven't guessed by this point, yes, these are brakes from AliExpress, but they are not some random unknown item from China. They actually can be bought in United States under the brand Yokozuna Mokoto. So the company Yokozuna actually sells them, and I know about a few small manufacturers. One of them is definitely STS Bikes that also use the same brakes under their own brand. So they actually quite popular, and they actually have a pretty good reputation. It's just that June Tech just sells them, so the company that probably makes them for Yokozuna just sells them on AliExpress, and you can buy these quite cheaply and just install them on your budget gravel bike to improve the braking power quite significantly. As I said, I'm using them for a couple of months, so at this point I can't tell you about the long-term reliability, but so far I just don't see any reason to go back to more traditional mechanical brakes. They work pretty damn well. So just to wrap things up, this is how it looks like. We have a 9-speed XT rear derailleur, we have a 10-speed chain on a 9-speed cassette, we have a GRX crankset, and we have a set of hybrid semi-hydraulic brakes on our budget gravel bike. I hope this video was at least a little bit interesting, and if it was, please give us a like and subscribe to the channel so you're not going to miss any new content.